Hey there, listeners. I was going to start today's podcast by letting you all know that there will only be one episode this week because I'm on vacation. And that's still the case, but I also wanted to let you know that there won't be any video to accompany that podcast because, well, a funny thing happened. I am on vacation in Madrid, and if you have been following my podcasting since, well, the 538 years, you know that I have a record of, there being crises or some kind of big news event when I happen to go on vacation. Today was no exception. I was at the Madrid Open when the power went out, not just in Madrid and not just at the Madrid Open, but all across Spain, Portugal, and parts of France. So I spent the past 10 hours without internet, without power, and I haven't had access to the video files for the podcast, today's podcast, which I recorded last week, thankfully. Otherwise, there might not be a podcast at all. Anyway, thank you for bearing with me, and I hope you enjoy today's episode, and I will be back with you on a twice-a-week basis very soon. Take a listen. You just ended being a Baptist pastor recently.
Yeah.
Does the world feel any different?
I just feel like I'm not like carrying the burden of like, oh, you're a pastor. You know what I mean? So you got to like do the right thing and be the right thing and say the right thing and be all moral and upstanding.
Like you can triple ladies now.
Yes, I can. And also say the F word on podcasts if I so desire.
Well, let's see if we get there today.
Maybe. I mean, if you're lucky, if you get me really fired up about something, you might hear an F-bomb.
Okay. All right. Well, I got my work cut out for me. Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Drink. There's rarely more attention paid to religion than when one pope passes and the College of Cardinals gathers to select another. Maybe it's because of the grandeur and secrecy that make it all a compelling news story. Maybe it's because 1.4 billion Catholics around the world really do care about the outcome. Or maybe the weight of a millennia-old tradition captures our imagination in a rapidly changing world. Whatever the reason, it gives us on the GD Politics Podcast an opportunity to reflect on the role that religion plays in society and politics today. And it's a pretty complex story, at least here in the United States. After a rapid rise of people who don't consider themselves part of any religion at all over the past 20 years, that trend line seems to have plateaued or maybe even reversed slightly. It's also harder than ever to figure out the directionality in the relationship between religion and politics. Does people's faith inform how they vote, as we might have traditionally thought? Or are people changing their religious identity because of their politics? Lucky for us, today I'm joined by someone who spends his days poring over just about all the data out there about religion in America. Ryan Burge is a professor at Eastern Illinois University. He writes the Graphs About Religion Substack, and until very recently was himself a Baptist pastor. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, always a pleasure to be with you, Galen. Appreciate being here.
It's so great to have you. It's been too long. And congratulations on, I guess, graduating from your pastoral position.
Oh, Easter was delightful, by the way.
I saw your tweet. You were like, this is my first Easter not working in a long time.
It was great. I got to sit in the back row with my family, not have to worry about anything. Like, it was the best Easter of my life.
Well, I was gonna ask you some questions about election processes in religious institutions. So I might as well ask you, how did they figure out how to replace you? Like, did a bunch of cardinals go in a conclave? Was there any smoke? Any corruption?
So, picture the Catholic Church. No, like there was, who replaced me? The answer is no one, Galen, because my church closed down.
Ryan, I'm so sorry.
We had about 8 to 10 people on a good Sunday near the end.
Damn.
And the money was running out. And honestly, just like the desire to keep doing it was running out. I was hanging on because a lot of people there wanted to keep going. And I thought, well, literally people who are 90 had been going to that church since they were kids. And I was like, I don't want to be the guy who tells you, no, we're done. I want you to tell me you're done. And a lot of them, got to the point where it's like, this is silly. Like, what are we doing here? And so after Easter last year, we voted that we should close. We picked July because that was our anniversary of our founding in 1868. So July 21st, 2024, First Baptist Church, which exists for over 160 years, met for the very last time, and those people have been sort of scattered to the wind in the last 6 or 8 months.
Well, that is sort of exactly what I want to talk to you about in the second portion of this conversation, which is the trend lines in terms of participation in faith-based communities and, churches overall. But let's give the Catholics their due. I'm curious, do you have a sense of why we are so taken with papal politics? I don't feel compelled to talk about the election of any other religious figure on this podcast.
Because you don't know about them, Galen. It's boring. I mean, let's be honest. The Pope is, when you think about religion in America, if I poll people, what one person exemplifies religion in this world, even non-religious people would probably say the Pope. Because he's the figurehead of a church that's 1.2 billion people, 62 million Catholics in America. There's no denomination in America that's even a fraction of the size of the Catholic Church. For instance, the Southern Baptist Convention is the next largest, and it's 12 million people. So the Catholic Church is 5 times that large, and the Southern Baptists elect a new president every year, and they really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Also, the Pope, when he, in certain circumstances, is speaking for God. That's what Catholic theology teaches, and no other large religion in America really teaches that either. So I think, and add to that all the pomp and circumstance and history and tradition and even when you saw the video of them putting the ribbon around the papal, where his apartment was to close that off after, people in a world where everything seems brand new and shiny and things are evolving so quickly, the Catholic Church says, no, man, we're going to do stuff the way we did it 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And I think with so little ceremony, that's one thing that we can all grab onto and go, that's awesome because no one else does it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I was grasping for comparison points, and one thing that comes to mind is King Charles. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious, does the Pope have real power? King Charles is in large part a ceremonial head. I guess he is also sort of chosen by God for that role, according to how the monarchy is supposed to work in Great Britain. But does the Pope only wield soft power outside of that, 0.17 square mile radius of the Vatican?
I think that's the word I was going to use, Galen, is soft power. The Pope can put an encyclical out about climate change or justice or abortion or whatever. The data says that the average Catholic does not agree with the church on all kinds of things, contraceptive usage. Over 95% of Catholics have used condoms, which is in direct violation of Catholic teaching. A majority of Catholics are in favor of abortion. Now, you can suggest things, right? And try to convince people that the death penalty is a violation of God's law. But at the end of the day, they're going to pick and choose what they want to believe or not believe. Now, they can influence who the cardinals are, and then who the bishops are, and then who the priests are, again, soft power on soft power on soft power. But in a Catholic service, it's an hour long typically. The homily is less than 5 minutes in a lot of parishes. So, how much power does the priest actually have to, shape your theology? The answer is not a whole lot. For a lot of Catholics, it's just cultural now. You're Italian-American or Hispanic or Irish, right? And so that's the religion that came here with your family. And so you go to church once or twice a year, your kids get confirmed, and that's really about the only influence that Catholicism has on your life directly or indirectly.
So there's going to be a lot of speculation over the coming days and weeks about who the next pope will be and about the legacy of Pope Francis, whether or not he was a good pope himself. How should we judge the performance of a pope, or maybe even other religious leaders as well? What does it mean to be a good or bad rabbi or pastor or patriarch or imam?
I think the best, this is my soapbox, is that 99% of clergy are really good people. I've met imams and rabbis and pastors and priests. They really try their best. They're not making a ton of money. They're not going to get famous, write books, and get speaking gigs and all that stuff.
Yeah, you got to get it on that prosperity gospel stuff. That's where it's at.
I missed the boat on that, man. My people, our budget last year was $30,000 for the entire year. So
Wait, no private planes?
I wish. I didn't even have a private bathroom at the church. But I really think that the measure for me is did you try your best? Did you serve your people? Did you shepherd them well? Did you serve your community? For a pastor, that's really all that matters. For the Pope, I think it's much more complicated, right? Do you want to be a reformer? And like, how do you want him to reform? And I think that's where I think that when Francis came in, he definitely had a perspective that he wanted to really change a few things in the Catholic Church. But if you look at like his 12-year papacy, not that much actually changed. He's almost like Donald Trump in that way, right? He'll like bluster about like, I want to make I'll give you a good example. When he first became Pope, he said he wanted to change the Catholic Church's policy on divorced people taking communion. Because according to the official rules, if you're divorced, you can't take communion. Unless you get an annulment, which is a whole process, and no one does that. Well, he said he was going to do that, but guess what he did? Nothing. Policy actually did not change. You know, he's talked about, you know, LGBT people, like kind of welcoming them in, but there's been no tangible policy change about acceptance. So it was a lot of talk and not a lot of action, because I think he realized at the end of the day, there's a lot of opposition, especially in the Vatican and in the Conference of Catholic Bishops in America, about those moves. So I think he came in wanting to be a reformer and realizing really quickly he didn't have that opportunity.
Does that put the Catholic Church out of step with, I think you mentioned some ways in which the Catholic Church is out of step with Catholics in America, but of course it's a global body and there's all kinds of different levels of conservatism and progressivism within the Catholic Church in Asia and Africa and South America and Europe. How does that net out? Like, does the church find itself falling further and further behind a global society that's progressing? Or is it pretty reflective of those 1.2, 1.4 billion Catholics that the Pope is meant to represent?
There's no one Catholic Church. That's the big problem, right? Like, there is, like, what is the Catholic Church? And it's like, there are progressive Catholics, there are conservative Catholics, there are socially progressive Catholics, but, you know, economically liberal Catholic. There, you can't define what the Catholic Church is. I think that's what the Pope ran into, I think, is like he tried to please certain people, not realizing who he was not pleasing by doing those things, and said, it's when you've got an institution of 1.2 billion people, you can't do anything that's not going to piss off 100 million people. Like, it's impossible. So I think he did what a lot of popes do, which is like kind of just steady as she goes. I think the things he did do were like the transparency thing around the abuse scandal, trying to make sure like the financial stuff, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, right? Like a lot of like plumbing, administrative stuff that we don't talk about. To me, that's really his legacy. But to kind of go to where you want to go next, Galen, I guarantee is he appointed a crap ton of cardinals. So when whoever picks the next pope they're in the College of Cardinals, but you have to be under the age of 80. That's what the rules say. Like, I like how we have age limits for cardinals, but we don't have it for president. We need to talk about that. But there's 135 cardinals that are eligible to select the next pope, and Francis picked 108 of them. So 80% of the voting members of the College of Cardinals will be Francis appointees. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be in the Francis line of things, but it definitely means that he's going to have some influence far after his death. So that actually might be his biggest legacy, is he wasn't the reformer, but he opened the door towards reform, and the next pope might be the one who actually does push us further towards like real reform and trying to make the Catholic Church kind of go into the 21st century on some of these issues. But other than Galen, he was the first Jesuit pope we've ever had, which I think is interesting. Like, for non-Catholics, Jesuits are considered to be like the most intellectual, academic, theologically liberal flavor of American Catholic priests. And I wonder if that also opens the door to having more Jesuits, more, you know, academically minded popes in that seat, which I think would change the church a lot, because I think the church, for a lot of people, is seen as kind of anti-intellectual or just not very intellectual, when it's actually incredibly intellectual. You know, at the most Georgetown, Notre Dame, like we can go on the list, right? I think returning to that in America might actually bring some Catholics back who just saw the church as being kind of old and archaic and stupid and anti-intellectual, maybe.
You mentioned a little bit about the electoral system for the College of Cardinals. How unique is that electoral system? If we want to compare them for a second to political institutions, I don't know if that's even worth doing, but how do these decisions get made?
Depends on, like, so like if like an Episcopal church, it'll be like the bishops will vote. It'll be the hierarchy. The United Methodist Church, it's the pastors and the bishops who vote in that situation. If you're like at a low church, like the Baptists are about as low church as you get, they have the messengers just show up to the convention, the annual meeting, and it's like literally lay people. It's a lot of pastors too, but it's like lay people. There was a convention, the SBC had a convention in the late 1970s. There were 40,000 people that voted. It's actually considered to be the largest election, in terms of votes, in the history of American religion for a leader. Like it just doesn't happen at that. It took like 6 hours to count the votes each time. So this is a weird system, though. Like being a cardinal is a lifetime appointment. You have almost no accountability either. Like you can't lose your job really unless you just do something awful. And so that's why anyone who's trying to handicap this is crazy town. Because those people walk in that room and they can have all kinds of thoughts about things that we don't even know. They might have already chosen someone. We just don't know it. So there's some possible candidates that I've seen before, but I don't spend a lot of time trying to handicap the race. It's a wide open field as far as I can tell.
You preempted my next question, which was, do you have any wagers on who the next pope will be?
The pope has never been from America, which I think is a problem, but I also think that in the international system, people think Americans have too much influence as it is. So I think it actually hurts a potential American pope. I don't think we're ever going to have an American pope in my life. I think the balance of power is shifting to the South, the global South, because that's where Catholic growth is happening. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if it's a pope from Africa. And there's over 200 million Catholics in the continent. So it's like you've got to give them something at some point because that's where the future of the church is below the equator. So I don't think it's going to be like a Benedict, right? Like a German or French or European or Italian. I'm almost certain it's going to be if the only thing I would bet on is it's a pope from the global South, maybe even Southeast Asia, because there's a lot of growth there too.
All right, let's talk about some trends in religion more broadly. The recently released Cooperative Election Study, which is thought of as a gold standard for understanding elections and, frankly, many aspects of American life, suggests that the number of Americans who don't identify as religious has actually dropped slightly. So in 2008, that group was 14%. It grew throughout the 20-teens up to 24%, but it dropped to 21% in 2024. And I should say here that this does not include agnostics and atheists who have been relatively steady. I think it was like 3 or 4% of each back in 2008, and it got up to, say, 6% or so of each more recently. But this trend, coupled with anecdotal stories about some young Americans becoming more religious, has got some people paying attention. And so I'm curious from your perspective, is there a signal here, or is this mostly noise so far, understanding that's only been a few years where we've seen this potential plateau or drop off?
So I wrote a piece last year called "The Nuns Have Hit a Ceiling," and I actually sat on that for a long time because I only had one data set that showed that, like that this plateau had happened. And I was like, one data set's one data. Maybe it's a weird quirk, right? And then it started showing up in the General Social Survey. Then it started showing up like in Dan Cox at AEI had a survey, showed the same thing. And I'm like, oh man, now these data, they're converging on this point that the nuns have hit a ceiling. And then Pew just had this huge report that came out a month or two ago.
Well, at least they're wearing habits.
Yeah. Like,
by the way, listeners, he's saying nuns as an N-O-N-E-S, which means no religion. God.
Not the flying nun, not Sally Field. But you get the point is that like whenever you see 4 different surveys all point to the same conclusion, you have a lot more confidence. This is not noise. This is signal now. And it's consistent. Now, a couple things I want to make a point, though. There's not a religious revival going on in America. Can we just be deadly honest about that? Like, there's not a huge return to religion. It's just the share of Americans who are Christians has stayed steady around the low 60s for the last 5 years. The nuns have stayed around 30% for the last 5 years. But here's the other point to make. If you look at the religiosity of young people, 42% of them are non-religious. If you look at boomers, it's 28%. So guess what's going to happen, Gail, in the next 20 years? Boomers are going to die, and they're going to be replaced by more Gen Z coming of age who are less religious. So the number is not going to go down from here. It's going to go up, but it'll go up more slowly because it's not switching that's happening now. It's just attrition. It's generational replacement. So this is a plateau, like a lag from the upward that's going to happen in the future. Now, it's not going to happen. We went from 5% non-religious to 30% in 30 years. So a 25-point jump in 30 years. In the next 30 years, it's not going to jump 25 more points. It'll jump 10 points, maybe 15 points. So a much slower rise, which is actually a big deal the more you think about it. Because it's like, we thought this was like not going to stop. But there's a core of religion in America that we've uncovered in this polling data in the last couple of years that shows us that we're not going to be Sweden or Denmark or the UK where 90% of people are non-religious. We're never getting there. It's just there's 40 or 50% of Americans going to be religious no matter what. And I think that's a really interesting story because it means that we're not going the way of the rest of the West. And we don't really have a good explanation for why right now.
Well, then you've once again preempted my questions. But, how religious is America compared with the rest of the world? I know those Northern European countries are very secular, but I don't know that it's fair to necessarily compare the United States to these relatively small, homogenous countries. Right? If you look at maybe a country like Brazil or, Russia or China, I don't know what exactly you would compare the United States to. It's hard. Canada. How do we stack up?
Our closest neighbor, I think, religiously is Italy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like 25% of Italians are weekly attenders, and about 20% of Americans are weekly attenders. Spain is kind of in the same. I wrote a post about like how our religion in America compares to like European religion. European religion is much more bimodal. So you have a handful of really religious countries, like Poland, for instance. If it was in America, it'd be the most religious state. It actually would be more religious than Utah. But then you've got like Denmark, where 3% of people attend church. So, you've got like the two edges. America looks much more normally distributed. Like the mean is 25%, and there's a lot of states in America that are just to the right and just to the left of 25%. In Europe, it's like you're either really religious or you're really not religious. Most religion is regional in this world. So like if you look at Southeast Asia, obviously take China out because of all those issues, but like they're incredibly religious. The Middle East, incredibly religious. Africa, incredibly religious. South America is interesting, though, because you can have a really religious country right next to a really irreligious country, kind of based on their history with Catholicism and things like that. So it's like, what's our closest cousin? It's hard. It's like hard to say because it's like, okay, how do you compare the religion of America to like Indonesia, which is overwhelmingly Muslim? So like that's just a different way to practice religion, a different thought, or Hinduism or Buddhism. Like they don't practice religion the same way we do in America. So it's like apples and oranges, right? It's just hard to find a corollary.
There's also an important difference between identifying with a religion and regularly attending religious services. What's the trend line there? Have we also seen a sort of plateau in terms of the decline of religious attendance? I mean, based on your experience most recently as a pastor, it sounds like that's one data point in the no column. But are we seeing a plateau where maybe even I've seen stories about even a rise in some places of religious attendance?
Huge survey came out from the Bible Society in the UK and Wales. They actually did a YouGov survey, which is like a good firm, right? Like a legitimately, it's like what major political parties use. So it wasn't like
listeners of this podcast know what YouGov is.
They're up with YouGov. Yeah, and they did it on purpose, by the way. They didn't want to like use like a Christian, polling firm because it's like it makes it look like you're trying to cook the books. And they saw that religion was increasing in England and Wales, especially among young people. The share who are attending weekly has gone from 8% to 12% in the last 5 years. I think there's some evidence. I think that's like sort of like when you hit bottom, the only way to go is up. And I think that's where England's at right now. It's like we went all the way down as low as we're going to get, and now it's a return.
Well, is that a COVID thing, though, too? Because within the past 5 years, attendance at every kind of social institution probably hit its nadir.
It was in 2018 before, so it was pre-COVID, and then 2024. So it's like you got both. You know what I mean? You got the before and the after. And I'll even give you, in an American context, if you look at the religious attendance of 18 to 35-year-old Protestants and Catholics, it's actually up 7 points in the last 15 years.
Why is that?
So whoever's left are true believers now. Like we sort of like cleaved out the cultural Christians, and now they're saying they're non-religious. So when you take those out, the numerator stays the same of like weekly attending Christians, but the denominator keeps changing because these not very religious people are dropping out, becoming not into nuns. And so what that means is the share of weekly attenders is going up because smaller but more concentrated. That's what American Christianity is now.
So there's not any, like if you actually look at the pews, there aren't more people in the pews. It's just that they represent a larger portion of their religion.
That's it. I say like it's like a reduction, like a chef. Like you put a lot of oil or whatever, sauce in a pot and you let it cook down for a long time so the flavors concentrate. That's what's happened to American religion in the last 30 years. It's boiled and boiled and boiled. Whoever's left, they're not going anywhere. And that's why we hit that ceiling.
Well, that's interesting because a different story gets told. I think these numbers get interpreted as the actual number of people sitting in pews is going up. And then people start writing stories about, like the alienation of modern life and AI and all of these unknowns and insecurities and fears are leading people to turn towards religion at higher rates. You don't think that's the case?
No, I mean, I think generally speaking, the pews are emptier now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That's a fact. But then you see weird stuff. Like I wrote a piece like 2 weeks ago. The share of people who believe in an afterlife is actually higher today than it was 30 years ago. Belief in miracles is actually up among everyone, especially college-educated people. So it's like you see these weird like things where it's like people ask me, is religion declining? And I want to say like, what kind? You got to define your terms for me. It's not declining across the board. It's declining overall, but like you can find pockets of things where it's like maybe we're going the other direction on things. And so it also depends on what region you are, what race you are, what religion we're talking about. Like for instance, in Christianity, non-denominationals are just growing gangbusters right now. Like it's the only Christian tradition that's grown over the last 15 years, and there's probably at least 30 million non-denominationals in America today. So they're the largest denomination. So in some ways, there's like green shoots in this whole thing.
Is my experience, I have a decent amount of experience with different religions, being raised in a mixed household and so on. Is non-denominational a northern term for evangelical?
No,
it's not.
No.
It seems like it has a lot in common with like the Southern Evangelical Church, but it's just more maybe like an appetizing name for people in the North who are not used to that kind of church.
So evangelical is like a tradition is what we say. And there are denominations inside evangelicalism. Like Southern Baptists are evangelical. The Assemblies of God is evangelical. Non-denominationals are evangelical almost by default because their theology and politics tend to be evangelical.
Okay. So that's what I'm picking up on.
But it's an organizational difference, though, Galen, which is like kind of imperceptible if you don't live in this world. But like if you're a non-denom, literally your pastor is the top of the organizational chart. There's no one above that person, like at a national office somewhere.
Oh, so everybody gets to pick what they want their own church to be like.
Yeah, pretty much. And honestly, like people don't realize there's a huge downside to this, and that's there's no accountability. Like, if there's a sex scandal in your church or a financial scandal in your church, in my church, we had someone to call, not at the state level and the national level, to call, come investigate, be the adults in the room. They don't have that. So there's really no accountability there, which is their biggest downfall, I think, is their cults of personality, a lot of them, because the pastor who started the church is still the pastor 30 years later. He's almost like a king in that little denomination, non-denominational denomination. And so when he leaves, like, how do you pass the baton? Because it's individual-based, not institutional-based. And religion in America has always been institutional-based for almost all of our history until this moment. And now we've changed the way organizationally we think about religion, and I think it's going to cause a lot of problems in 20 years that we're just not talking about yet because they haven't really emerged yet.
Today's podcast is brought to you by you, the listener. I'm in the early stages of getting this podcast off the ground, and it will only succeed with your support. I want to bring you coverage that embraces curiosity, rigor, and a sense of humor. And I want to bring it to you on a regular basis with more episodes, more insight, and more laughs. I can only do that if you subscribe to and support this podcast. Go to gdpolitics.com and become a paid subscriber today. Even better, do it right now. gdpolitics.com, that's G as in gosh, D as in darn, and politics as in that hot mess. Head to gdpolitics.com to subscribe, and thank you. From looking at this most recent cooperative election study, what can we understand about those trend lines for religious people in America and how that intersects a bit with politics?
I think the biggest finding is that even, like, so there's these traditions in America we consider to be like liberal Protestant traditions, like the Methodists, the Episcopalians. There's almost no liberal white religious tradition in America today. And that used to not be the case. Like, even like the United Methodist Church, which is seen as like liberal.
Jews?
Jews, actually I did a post, I just wrote a post on Jews. They're actually still solidly Democrats, but they're only 1.5% or 2% of America. Mm-hmm. So like, and they're geographically concentrated, so which means they don't really have a big impact on election day because they're not in, Michigan but even like the Methodists are 60% Republicans now. Oh, the white Catholics are 60% Republican now. I mean, so people are like, oh, the evangelicals are what put Trump in the White House. I'm like, no, not white evangelical Christians. All white Christians basically put Trump in the White House. The only one that bucks the trend is the Episcopal Church, but there's only 400,000 average attenders in the Episcopal Church. Like they're 1/15
in the whole
the
country.
size. Yeah, in the entire country, there's 1.1 million, and their average weekly attendance is 400,000 in a country of 335 million people. They don't matter in the grand scheme of things.
Wow. Were there any other interesting trends that you picked up on in terms of religion and politics? Actually, I know that there are because you're in the process of writing what could probably be an entire book on your Substack about this, going segment of religious society by segment of religious society. But so that's maybe the top line takeaway. What are some other bullet points?
So non-white evangelicals shifted significantly to the right between 2020 and 2024, about 7 or 8 points. Big deal. So now non-white evangelicals are evenly politically divided when they used to favor the Democrats pretty significantly. White Catholics continuing to trend towards the right, gone from 55% for Trump to 60% for Trump now. But here's the bigger story. I just wrote this post about political activity in 2024. It was down about 25%. That's not voting, by the way. That's like going to a protest, going to a school board meeting, putting up a political yard sign, donating to a campaign. All that stuff was down 25% across the board from 2024 compared to 2020. And it was down, like for instance, atheists, 15% fewer atheists gave money to a candidate in 2024 compared to 2020. Like the atheists and agnostics were not at all excited about what was going on in the 2024 election, which I think is one of the reasons that Trump ran up the score so much. Harris just did not excite them in any way.
I think this is a bit of a segue into, for me, the most interesting part of this conversation. You joined me on an episode of the 538 Politics podcast a year or so ago. And the title of that episode was, Where Will People Commune in a Godless America? And towards the end, when 538 was wrapping up, the producers told me that that was one of the episodes that they thought about most frequently that we ever did, because they liked the title, but also because, I was working with, young men in their 20s who were thinking about who worked from home a lot of the time, who were thinking about where will I commune with people? But have we gotten any closer to that answer in the year or so since we talked?
I mean, I think that the third space problem is maybe the most under-discussed, most important problem in American life right now. Like there was a really funny tweet like 6 months ago. Someone was like, I really wish there was a space in America where you could like hang out that didn't cost a whole lot and there wasn't really alcohol or anything, but you could like chill. And I'm like, there probably is, dude. Probably less than a mile away, and they'd love to have you. It's called church. They're like, but I don't believe in that stuff. And I'm like, I didn't half the time either, but I showed up anyway. Like, we need places to hang out, social places to hang out, and we don't have them. And when you get rid of religion, this is what I said. Like, I talk to like atheist groups a lot. They go, do you think I have a morally defective worldview? I go, no, I don't. Your worldview is yours. Mine is mine. We're different on that. Where I really want to like speak to you is, if you don't go to church, what is your social place? What have you created that replaces that thing that you had with religion? And for by and large, what I've seen in the data is no one has managed to do that in an effective way at this point. And until they do, I think we've got a real problem on our hands.
Well, why not? And this actually makes me think back to what you said about Denmark, right? Only 3% of Danish people attend weekly religious services. But Danish people the research suggests, aren't particularly lonely, have meaningful lives, have a strong sense of shared fate amongst their fellow Danes. Have other countries figured out how to fill that void? Like, why can't it just be the metaphorical bowling leagues or whatnot? Like, what is Denmark doing? Has no one come up with a solution?
I mean, we're not Denmark. We're not 90% white, Northern European, blonde hair, blue eyed folks. Like, we're a diverse country. And you know what the data says, whether you like it or not, is people are cool with welfare if it goes to people that look like them and think like them and vote like them. And America's never been that way. We've always been heterogeneous. We've always been diverse, religiously, politically, racially, ethnically, economically. And I think that's the problem is it's easier to join together when everyone looks like you. Everyone thinks like you. And in America, we don't have that. We've never really had that. The other thing adding to that is we're just a much more sparse population. Like, a lot of parts of America just are very, the meeting places don't exist. And religion, like if you go to a small town in the Midwest, you know what the communal space is?
The bar.
It's church. Oh. Like there is no other space. So what do you do with that? If you get rid of that, what do you got? You don't have anything else.
Yeah. I mean, this puts religion in a weird place where, like, I think there's a lot of people who would say that the thing about religion and religious services is faith, and that faith is really important. But it sounds like you, a pastor until recently, you're telling people, just show up. The faith is secondary. It doesn't matter if you believe in any of this stuff. You just need to spend some time with some other folks, like get out of your house, touch grass. But I think there's probably a lot of people in religious communities who would be like, no, that's not what this is about. Like, we actually care about doctrine or faith or whatever.
That's where I get in a lot of trouble because I'm at some point I'm going to write a book called Why You Should Go to Church Even If You Don't Believe in Any of It. And it's basically going to make the social argument for the value of religion. Like, if you look at the data over and over again, you realize that, like, most Catholics disagree with the church. We talked about this. They disagree with the church on all kinds of things, yet they still show up. Most evangelicals don't believe Jesus is the only way to heaven. Most evangelicals don't believe Jesus is the only way to heaven. So why are they going? Because they see the value in the other stuff. And I think there's this facade that exists where it's like, well, if I don't believe all of it, then I'll feel like a phony if like a Holden Caulfield thing. Like, you're all phonies. Guess what, dude? We're all phonies. Like, none of us believe that. And I think as soon as you get over that, you realize that everyone here is just doing what you're doing, which is struggling to get through life as best you can, right? Struggling to make sense of a world that's sometimes hard to make sense of. But you know what got me through my worst moments was not always my belief. It was my other people's belief in me. Like they saw me as their pastor. And if you trust me enough to do that, then I've got to trust myself to get through those dark moments. And I think that's what people need to realize. I call it the casserole problem. Like if you go to the hospital and you get discharged, you come home and you can't cook, who's going to cook for you? Well, when both my kids were born, I came home and there was a pot of soup on my step both times from ladies from the church. Like, that's what makes life worth living. Like that sense of community and belonging and togetherness. We haven't replaced that with anything.
Can you start a new church just so I can attend it? But I stalked you a little bit on Twitter before talking to you. You wrote, a common comment I am seeing is, quote, I'm not religious and I live a very meaningful life. And you did a survey yourself of 15,000 people last year on this. And you said you found two things. One, lots of non-religious folks do live meaningful lives. But two, it's still lower than religious people. Is the answer community? Is there something more to it than that?
Meaning is a hard thing, right? Like, it's just hard to wrap our head. Because
wait, and actually, can you give us a little more data first? Like, of the 15,000 people that you talked to, what was the discrepancy in terms of having a meaningful life? And did you just ask people, like, do you have a meaningful life? Or were there actual markers of what a meaningful life was?
Well, so it was 12,000 non-religious people, then like 3,000 religious people was like sort of like a control group and a treatment group. And we made one of the statements was, I live a meaningful life. And you could strongly disagree to strongly agree. And about 2/3 of non-religious people said, I live a meaningful life. They agree with that statement. That was still 10 points lower than religious people. Then we ask questions like, my life has worth. My life has purpose. Like, I'm going to leave a legacy behind. And in every one of those situations, religious people tend to score between 5 and 7 points higher than non-religious people. And the question there is like, why is that, right? Does religion provide some sort of meaning or purpose, or do people become religious because they already feel like they live a meaningful and purposeful life? Like, the causality there is a little tough, but I think why I like that result is two things. It tells nuns that they're probably okay, like that most of them are doing fine, but it also says that, but there's something, there's a little zhuzh there, right? Like, there's something between those two things that we really need to think about. And I think the next layer of this research is, like, if we could, like, find a social nun that compares to, like, a social religious person, does that close the gap? Is that what makes that meaning gap disappear? We don't know this stuff yet because we're really brand new in this field, like doing a lot of data work with non-religious people. So there's a group called Sunday Assembly. Have you heard about this before, Galen? Sunday Assembly?
I heard about it from you specifically.
From me?
The last time you were on the podcast with me.
Yeah, it's a group of atheists who wanted to have church. It was called like Church Without God, and they met in like 35 metro areas in America. And a lot of them, like, it became like a big media story, like, oh, let's go to the Church Without God. And they would sing like pop songs, like Living on a Prayer together, and then do like a TED Talk. Well, most of them have closed down. And one of the reasons they closed down was because they were afraid to ask for money because it felt too much like religion. Guess what? Religion works because it knows what it has to do to perpetuate itself, and asking for money is not fun, but a necessary part of any organization to survive. And so they couldn't rent the hall, they couldn't pay the speaker, they couldn't pay the band to do all that stuff, and a lot of them closed down. So it's like, you can't kick one. Listen, organized religion has existed in the world for all of recorded history, basically. And why? Because they figured out the formula to make it work. You can't just remove one part of it and hope the rest of it works, because it won't. So if you want to replicate religion, you got to replicate the parts you like and the parts you don't like. And things like asking for money, you just got to do it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where in my own world you could find people to compare to what the social life is like for a religious person. I'm thinking like there's line dancing groups, there's all kinds of recreational sports. I wonder, the rec sports leagues are pretty strong here in New York City, where I'm talking to you from. I used to live in Wisconsin. They were pretty strong there too. It's a relatively secular state. I mean, which gets us back to the bowling leagues conversation. But it's also, I think there's a class divide here. Like these rec leagues are full of college-educated folks.
Oh, but you know what? There's even a class divide in religion too. This is something that, like, people read too much Karl Marx, as like in high school and college. Like, religion's for dumb people. It's for uneducated, the unwashed masses are religious because it helps them cope with their like terrible life. You know what the people that are most likely to go to church this Sunday are? People who have college degrees, 4-year college degrees, who make between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. That is the most likely group in America to attend a house of worship this weekend. It's a growing divide, and it's not just about religion. It's about, like you mentioned, rec leagues, social clubs. You know, the people who are joining that stuff are people who have time and money and education. And there's a dropping out begets dropping out. So dropping out of college begets dropping out of church, which begets dropping out of the Elks, which gets, you see what I'm saying here? Like, we're seeing a growing social divide in America. And what the data says is, if you want to move up the economic ladder, one of the really good predictors of that is being around people who are of a higher economic class than you are. And Raj Chetty did this great study out of Harvard. They looked at this Facebook connections of 40 million people. You know what the most economically diverse spaces are in America? It's not schools. It's not neighborhoods. It's not jobs. It's church. Because you got people from, middle, upper, lower. And guess what? Church people, in my experience, church people love to help other church people however they can. So if you get, it's asking for a job of a random guy, he's going to say no. Asking a job for a guy who sits in the pew down from you for the last 6 months, he's going to say yes, because you're part, whether you like it or not, that's a community that you've built, and it's exclusive in that way. So I think we got to think about, again, people aren't, I tell pastors this all the time, you can preach as good as you want and have great doctrine and theology and da-da-da-da-da. You know why people are going to come or stay? It's because their friends are there. They see social utility and value in being there, and you should think a lot more about the horizontal benefits of religion as opposed to the vertical benefits of religion.
I like that. I have one more somewhat pot-stirring question before I let you go, because I have a quota I have to hit in every podcast. For a long time, we've heard from more religious members of American society that we ought to be having less sex before marriage. We ought to be drinking and smoking less too. That is now the case in American society. Young people are engaging in those so-called vices at the lowest rates on record. So have the religious conservatives won?
That's what people, like, I show them the chart where like smoking is down like from like 60% to 20%, drinking's down by half. Like even marijuana usage is down, sex is down among young people. Yeah, among young people. And they're like, we've won. I'm like, if you look at, like, you break it out by religion, it doesn't matter at all. Like, religious teens and non-religious teens are doing stuff at a much lower rate. So, like, I think it's like the ineffectiveness of religion to really shape society. There's something in the zeitgeist right now that I don't think we fully understand that's driving people away from these vices. And it sure as heck is not religion. I actually think religion has nothing to do with it, which I think also is a huge indictment, like, of the ability of religious people to like shape the macro level culture of America. It's just not happening. It hasn't happened and it won't happen. It's got to be something outside of religion.
And I think it so happens that those same people are feeling lonelier than ever as well, right?
Oh, I say it all the time. I go, listen, there's some really positive things like teen pregnancy is down by 75%, smoking's down exponentially, but loneliness is also higher than it's ever been. So it's not an all positive or all negative story. It just depends on how you want to look at it. There's Gen Z is doing some things that are really, really good and some things that should scare the hell out of us in equal measure, honestly.
All right. Well, we're going to leave things there for today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ryan.
Thanks, Galen. Appreciate it.
My name is Galen Druk. I'm in the early days of getting this podcast off the ground, and I appreciate your support in any way possible. Subscribe to GD Politics wherever you get your podcasts, and if you'd be so kind to rate and review us. Maybe even tell a friend about the podcast. Also, importantly, subscribe to the Substack at gdpolitics.com. There you'll get updates on what we're doing, extras, and you can support this project directly. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.